My parents took my college fund to buy my brother a car. The second I heard those words from my best friend, who had just overheard my parents talking, I felt my hands turn cold. My breath stopped in my chest. For months, I had been worrying about how I would pay for tuition at State University, only to learn that the money was gone. All of it. I grabbed my phone and immediately confronted my mother. My voice trembled with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Is it true? Did you and Dad use my college savings to buy Derek that new convertible?" I wanted to hear her deny it. I wanted it to be a misunderstanding or a cruel joke. She hesitated. A long, dreadful pause. That was enough of an answer for me. The anger in my stomach flared up like a lightning strike. For years, I had kept my head down, gotten good grades, and stayed out of trouble. Derek was the one who partied, spent money recklessly, and never seemed to care about the future. Yet, they rewarded him with the car of his dreams. At that moment, I realized my entire future was on the line, and the people I trusted most had put me here. I grew up believing my parents had set aside money for my college education. They always talked about how important a degree was, and how proud they would be when I became the first in our family to graduate from a 4-year university. I worked tirelessly, keeping my grades high, volunteering, and doing extracurricular activities. College acceptance letters started rolling in, and I felt unstoppable. But my older brother, Derek, seemed to float through life on a cloud of carefree fun. He flunked out of community college twice and hopped from one part-time job to another. Each time he messed up, Mom and Dad welcomed him back home without consequences. He was the favorite, though they never said it outright. They just showed it, over and over. When I discovered that every dollar meant to fund my dreams had gone to buy Derek a brand new sports car, I felt robbed. Not just financially, but emotionally. Their betrayal stung me deeper than any cut or bruise ever could. College was my path to a better life. I had pinned my hopes on those savings. With no money left, I wondered how I would even start paying for tuition, or if I should even bother trying anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind churned with fury and disbelief. I looked at the acceptance letter from State University, reading it again and again. The words that once filled me with excitement now weighed heavily on my heart. All I could think was, they stole my future. I stared at the ceiling, recalling how, just a week ago, Derek had shown off his new car in the driveway. "Isn't it sweet?" he had said, grinning from ear to ear. I remembered the way my mother glanced at me nervously, as if she knew I might ask questions about how they paid for such an expensive vehicle. My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. I hated that I was crying, hated that their actions could hurt me this much. But I couldn't help it. Anger mixed with heartbreak is a powerful thing. My dream of walking across the stage in a cap and gown, receiving my degree, and making something of myself seemed to be slipping away. Eventually, I wrote in my journal, "I will find a way, even if I have to do it without them." Then I promised myself I would never forget this betrayal. The next morning, I confronted my parents in person. My dad was in the kitchen reading the newspaper, and my mom was making breakfast. Derek was nowhere to be seen, probably out driving his new toy. I walked in and slammed the acceptance letter on the table. "Explain," I demanded, my voice shaking but firm. "You promised me this money my entire life. Now I hear it's gone. Tell me how you could do that." My father looked up, startled. My mom's cheeks flushed. She turned off the stove burner, then started rambling about how Derek had been going through a rough patch. She claimed he needed a car to find better work and get his life together. Apparently, they believed Derek's immediate need was more important than my education. I stood there, stunned by how casually they spoke about it, like my life's ambition was just some flexible plan they could rearrange at will. Dad tried to sound reassuring, saying, "We'll figure something out for you. You can take out loans, get scholarships. There are lots of ways to pay for college." It took everything in me not to shout. Their betrayal was so profound that I could barely find my voice. "I can't believe this," I whispered before storming out. Once in my room, I paced back and forth, clutching my phone. My hands trembled as I dialed my best friend Ava. She picked up immediately. "I don't know what to do," I blurted. "They're acting like it's no big deal that they spent my entire college fund on Derek." I might not be able to go to college now." Ava's voice grew tight with sympathy. "I'm so sorry. Have you considered maybe going part-time and working? Or do you have any scholarships lined up?" "I have a partial scholarship," I said, tears gathering in my eyes again. "But it only covers a fraction of the tuition. I was counting on that money my parents promised. Without it, I'm sunk." Ava was quiet for a moment, then offered her support. "I can help you look for options, grants, more scholarships, maybe a part-time job." "But what about your parents? Are they sorry at all?" I thought back to how calm they were in the kitchen. It's like they think I should just get over it. They keep telling me Derek needed it more. I don't know how to forgive them. I'm angry. No, I'm furious. I wiped away a tear, realizing that the life I planned was falling apart. That evening, I went downstairs, determined to have a second talk with my parents. I needed them to understand the seriousness of what they had done. But when I arrived in the living room, I saw Derek sprawled on the couch, bragging about his new ride to his friends on speakerphone. "It's a total chick magnet," he said, laughing. "Mom and Dad really came through this time." My stomach twisted. I couldn't hold back. "Derek, do you even care that I don't have money to go to college now because of you?" He looked at me blankly and shrugged. "Hey, it's not my fault you're stuck. I didn't force them to pay for my car, you know." My father scolded me for yelling. My mother insisted we remain calm, but I couldn't believe their lack of remorse. They acted as if Derek was the victim of some cosmic injustice that only a shiny car could fix. When I reminded them that college was just a few months away, Dad said I should consider community college or work while studying. "Other people do it," he added, as if that solved everything. I felt a cold emptiness in my chest. It dawned on me that they really had chosen Derek's convenience over my future. After that confrontation, I avoided being at home whenever I could. I started picking up extra hours at the local diner where I worked part-time. The manager, Mr. Olson, was kind enough to give me more shifts. He saw I was serious about earning money. I juggled finishing high school, applying for scholarships, and working. My once simple life was now a whirlwind of stress and exhaustion. Every day I passed by Derek's new car parked in the driveway, a glaring reminder of what I'd lost. I tried not to resent him personally, but each time I heard the engine rev, bitterness flared in my heart. Worse, my parents acted like the tension was my fault. They kept urging me to be understanding, claiming Derek was going through a phase. In their eyes, I was the stubborn one who refused to move on. My nights were plagued with restless sleep. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, worrying about tuition bills. I dreaded the day the university would send me the statement I couldn't possibly pay, but I refused to let them crush my dream. I had come too far to give up now. If my own family wouldn't support me, I'd do it all myself. Graduation day was supposed to be a celebration. I had maintained a high GPA, balanced work, and dedicated countless hours to studying. But on the morning of the ceremony, I felt no excitement. I put on my cap and gown in silence. My parents offered lukewarm smiles, though my mother did snap a few pictures for social media. Derek didn't even bother coming. He was too busy, apparently. The drive to the graduation venue was awkward. My parents didn't mention college once. In the past, they would have been buzzing with pride, telling everyone how their daughter was off to a great school. Now, they avoided the topic entirely. During the ceremony, when my name was called, I walked across the stage, head held high, determined not to let my sadness ruin the moment. I shook the principal's hand, took my diploma, and forced a smile for the camera. Deep down, though, I was seething. My classmates' families cheered loudly and celebrated their accomplishments. My parents gave a polite clap, which only fueled my anger. I should have felt proud, but all I felt was hollow. The future I had worked so hard for was overshadowed by the choice they made to fund Derek's car instead of my education. After graduation, I intensified my search for financial aid. I spent hours filling out forms, writing essays, and emailing scholarship committees. My acceptance at State University hung in the balance. Their tuition deadline approached, and I had no idea how to cover the gap. The partial scholarship I received was helpful, but nowhere near enough. I also kept working at the diner, sometimes covering late shifts that ended at midnight. Each day, exhaustion dug deeper under my eyes. But I refused to quit. If my parents weren't going to help, I had to help myself. One afternoon, as I was about to leave for work, my mom approached me with a slightly embarrassed expression. "We can give you a little bit of money," she said hesitantly, "but it won't be much." We had to spend more than expected on Derek's insurance and some repairs. A wave of anger flooded over me, but I stayed calm. "Don't bother," I replied quietly, grabbing my coat. I left the house before she could say another word. Her sudden offer felt like a weak gesture, not a genuine attempt to make things right. The truth was sinking in. I could no longer trust them. Every step forward, I would have to take a loan. The last straw came when I received an email from the university's financial office. My final payment schedule was set, and even with my partial scholarship, I was thousands of dollars short. There was no way I could come up with the funds in such a short time, even if I worked double shifts every day. Late that night, I sat alone at the kitchen table. My dad walked in, flipping the lights on. "You're still up?" he asked, his tone almost accusatory. I looked at him, tears in my eyes. "I'm about to lose my chance at college, and you're asking if I'm still up?" He sighed, looking uncomfortable. "We just didn't expect the car to be so expensive. Your mom and I are trying to manage finances, but it's tough right now. Derek needed help." "I needed help," I interrupted, my voice raw with emotion. "And you stole from me to help him. Is that fair at all?" He shook his head, clearly conflicted, but said nothing that would change the situation. In that moment, I realized that I was on my own. The only way to move forward was to cut them off emotionally, if not financially, because they had already betrayed me beyond repair. I woke up the next morning feeling numb, as if my emotions were on pause. Instead of crying or shouting, I calmly packed a small suitcase. My heart pounded, but I kept telling myself I needed to leave for my own sanity. Ava had offered me her spare room a while ago. She said, "Stay with me if things get too toxic at home." It seemed like the perfect solution. I could find a way to pay rent, keep working, and maybe take a break to figure out my college plan. I came downstairs, and my mom was in the kitchen. She saw me carrying the suitcase, and her eyes widened. "Where are you going?" "I'm moving out," I said, my voice steady. "I can't live here anymore." She started to protest, talking about how I was overreacting. My father walked in and asked me to reconsider, but I could see in their eyes that they still didn't grasp the magnitude of what they'd done. Derek was out with his car, of course, oblivious or simply uninterested in the tension at home. I said nothing else, just walked out, leaving them both stunned and silent. My heart was pounding, but for the first time I felt in control. Moving in with Ava was a relief, but it also came with a sense of sadness. It felt like I was abandoning my family, yet they had abandoned me first. Within a week, I was settled into her spare room. She helped me decorate it with photos and bright posters, trying to cheer me up. The emotional weight on my shoulders didn't vanish, though. I still woke up some mornings feeling betrayed and hollow. My parents called a few times, leaving voicemails asking me to come back. Each time, I listened to their messages with clenched teeth. They kept saying they missed me, but never once did they talk about repaying the money they took or acknowledging the damage they caused. Ava and I spent our evenings applying for any scholarship we could find online, even small ones. $50 here, $100 there, Ava said optimistically. It all adds up. I appreciated her support, but I couldn't ignore the reality that time was running out. Fall semester was approaching. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of Derek's social media posts, photos of him posing with his car, going out to parties, living it up. Each picture felt like a direct slap in my face. My parents came by Ava's apartment unexpectedly one afternoon. They didn't even call first. I heard a knock on the door, and when I opened it, there they stood. My mom looked anxious. My dad seemed stern. "We've been trying to talk to you," my dad said, crossing his arms. "Why haven't you answered our calls?" I stepped outside, not wanting Ava to be dragged into the scene. "I have nothing to say," I replied coldly. "Unless you have my college fund magically back in your hands?" My mom frowned. "Can't we just sit down and discuss this like adults?" A surge of frustration shot through me. "You want to discuss it now? After you took everything from me and spent it on Derek's car?" My father began to argue that the money was still partly mine, in spirit, which sounded ridiculous. Mom offered a few $100s as a compromise, but that was a speck compared to what was needed. Their reluctance to own up to the real damage told me everything. I shook my head. "Keep your money. I'll figure this out on my own." Then I walked back inside and closed the door, leaving them standing in the hallway, no longer welcome in my life. That night, I was a mess of emotions. Anger, sadness, regret, and a strange sense of relief. I had stood my ground and refused to let them guilt me back into that toxic environment. But I wondered if I had gone too far. They were still my parents, after all. Ava noticed my turmoil and tried to comfort me. She said, "You're doing what's best for you. Don't let them make you feel guilty for wanting a future." Her words gave me strength. I kept focusing on my goal, to attend college and build the life I had dreamed of. I was tired of the drama, tired of feeling like I had to fight for my parents' attention or support. In the following days, I worked extra hours at the diner. I also took on a side gig tutoring younger kids in math. My energy levels were at an all-time low, but every bit of income mattered. Slowly, I started collecting enough to cover at least the first semester's gap, but it was still a huge stretch. I wrote in my journal each night, reminding myself of why I was doing this, and each entry ended with the same phrase, "I will not give up." As the summer wore on, tension with my family escalated on social media. Derek posted cryptic messages about me being dramatic and how family should stick together. My parents occasionally posted old photos of me with captions like, "Hope our girl comes home soon." It infuriated me that they portrayed themselves as the victims while ignoring the core issue. They had stolen my future. A few relatives messaged me privately, asking if everything was okay. Some believed my parents' version of events, that I was overreacting to a family decision. I found myself explaining, in frustration, how they had promised me a college fund my entire life but used it for a car. Some relatives were shocked and sympathetic, while others urged me to make peace for the sake of family. Their words only fueled my determination to stand my ground. Meanwhile, I discovered additional scholarship opportunities. I spent countless hours writing personal essays about my life experiences and career goals. Laying bare my struggles on paper was emotionally draining, but also oddly empowering. Each scholarship application felt like a chance to reclaim what was taken from me. Despite the chaos, I refused to let my parents' betrayal define my entire life. Time was running out, and the financial deadline for State University loomed just a few weeks away. I had scraped together almost enough to cover the first semester, but almost wasn't good enough. I needed every cent. It felt like a tightrope walk without a safety net. A stroke of luck came when Mr. Olson, my diner manager, approached me. He said he saw how hard I'd been working, and he offered to give me an advance on my paycheck to help cover the remaining gap. My eyes welled up with gratitude. "I'll pay you back every penny," I promised. "Just focus on your future," he said, handing me an envelope. "I believe in you." I accepted his kindness and finalized my payment to the university that same day. The wave of relief that washed over me was overwhelming. I had done it without my parents' help. A sense of pride blossomed in my chest, mixed with lingering anger that it had come to this in the first place. Yet I was finally on track to start college. I felt a shift deep within me, a realization that I was forging my own path. My parents' betrayal still hurt, but I wouldn't let it hold me back anymore. Move-in day at State University arrived quickly. Ava helped me pack my things. I didn't have a lot, just clothes, bedding, some books, and basic dorm supplies we picked up on discount. I didn't tell my parents when or where I was moving in. They never asked, and I never volunteered the information. When I stepped onto the campus, a rush of excitement mixed with anxiety welled up inside me. This was the place I had dreamed about for years. Now I was actually here, ready to start classes. I reminded myself that I had earned this moment. No one else handed it to me. After getting my dorm key, I found my room. It was small, with 2 beds, 2 desks, and a single window that overlooked a courtyard. My roommate hadn't arrived yet, so I took a moment to sit on the bed and breathe it in. All my hard work led me here, from the diner shifts to the tutoring sessions and those endless scholarship applications. I felt a hint of sadness that my parents weren't here to celebrate, to hug me and say they were proud. But I quickly pushed the thought aside. I was free. For once, my life felt like it belonged entirely to me. Classes started, and the campus buzzed with energy. Students hustled to lectures, joined clubs, and formed study groups. I was eager to dive in. The first week was a blur of syllabi, new faces, and adjusting to dorm life. I found myself studying in the library until late at night, determined not to waste the opportunity I had fought so hard to keep. Every time I saw a campus family event, like parents helping their kids move in or taking them out to lunch, it stung a little. I couldn't help imagining my own parents there, proud and supportive. But that image was a fantasy. The reality was that I was here alone, financing my own education. One afternoon, I got a text from my mom. It simply said, "We miss you. Come home soon." I stared at the message for a long minute, feeling a swirl of conflicting emotions. I typed back a short response. "I'm at college. I'm fine." She didn't reply. Despite the emotional baggage, I threw myself into my coursework. I joined a study group for my toughest subject, biology, and made a few new friends in the dorm. Slowly, I started building a life that didn't revolve around my parents' decisions. A month passed, and midterms were approaching. My schedule was packed with lab reports, essays, and reading assignments. I was surviving mostly on ramen noodles and late-night coffee. But I was doing it. I was keeping up, learning, and even thriving in some classes. The feeling of accomplishment was unlike anything I had experienced before. Then, out of the blue, Derek contacted me. He sent a long message saying that Mom and Dad were worried and that I was being unfair by ignoring them. He mentioned how they only intended to borrow from my college fund and had no idea it would turn into this big of an issue. I stared at the message in disbelief. Borrow? There had never been any mention of paying it back until now, and it certainly wasn't framed as a loan when they purchased his car. My anger flared up again. I typed back a response, my fingers trembling. "You don't get to rewrite history. They took my fund without asking. Don't pretend it was just a misunderstanding." His reply came swiftly, blaming me for tearing the family apart. That was the final straw. I blocked his number, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. News travels fast in families, and soon I started getting messages from uncles, aunts, and cousins, some I barely knew. They all had their own opinions on the situation. A few supported me, praising my determination to go to college on my own. Others scolded me, insisting that no matter what happened, blood is thicker than water. One particular aunt, Aunt Jill, reached out and offered me a small loan for textbooks. I was touched by her kindness and accepted it, promising to pay her back as soon as I could. She also told me she was proud of me for not giving up on my education. But the negativity from others wore on me. People who had no idea how deeply my parents' betrayal cut would urge me to forgive and forget. I felt like screaming each time I read those words. It wasn't just a petty argument. It was my entire college fund, my future, that they carelessly handed over to my brother. I resolved to focus on the positives, like Aunt Jill's support. I reminded myself of all the classmates and mentors at college who had become my new family in a sense. I wasn't alone, and I didn't need toxic ties dragging me down. The semester reached its halfway point, and my finances were running on fumes. Working a part-time job on campus became necessary to cover basic living expenses. I found a position in the library's archives, sorting and digitizing old documents. It was quiet, and I could study during downtime. On a rainy Thursday evening, I came back to my dorm, exhausted from both classes and work. I found a large envelope in my mailbox. Opening it revealed a letter from the scholarship committee of a local organization. I had completely forgotten that I applied months ago. My heart pounded as I read their words. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been chosen to receive a financial award." Tears welled up in my eyes. The scholarship wasn't huge, but it was enough to cover my overdue textbook costs and potentially some living expenses for the next semester. It felt like a small miracle. I immediately texted Ava to share the good news. She sent back a stream of happy emojis and congratulations. For a brief moment, all the anger, betrayal, and stress faded. I felt validated. My hard work was paying off, and I was finding my own way without depending on people who hurt me. With my scholarship confirmed, a tiny weight lifted from my shoulders. I still had a long road ahead, but at least I could see a path forward. My grades were solid, My professors were encouraging, and I was even developing a friendship with my roommate, Kayla, who turned out to be more fun than I initially expected. One weekend, Kayla and I decided to attend a small campus festival. Music, food trucks, and student-led booths lined the main quad. For the first time in a while, I felt genuinely lighthearted. We danced to upbeat music and tried free samples of homemade baked goods. I almost forgot about the drama with my family. That evening, though, I noticed a missed call from my mother. She left a voicemail saying, "Your father and I want to talk about your future plans. We want you to come home for the holidays." The tone of her voice sounded pleading, but still lacked the acknowledgement of what they had done. I weighed my options. Could I go home and face them without an apology or any real change? The thought made my stomach twist. I was torn between the love I once had for them and the new peace I had found away from them. After a few days of thinking, I decided to have a final discussion with my parents, but on my terms. I called them and asked if they could meet me at a small cafe near campus. I didn't want them in my dorm or my private space. They agreed, and we set a time. When they arrived, I could see the relief on their faces. My mom reached out for a hug, but I held up my hand. "Let's sit," I said, not wanting to blur boundaries. They started explaining how family should come first, how they'd had no idea the cost of Derek's car would be so high. My dad said they felt forced to use the fund in the heat of the moment, promising that they would make it up to me. But the words rang hollow, without details or real remorse. I listened silently, waiting for something, a genuine apology, a plan to pay me back, or even a statement of accountability. None of that came. Finally, my mother asked, "When are you coming home?" I took a deep breath, my resolve solidifying. "I'm not," I said. "Not until I see real change and an actual effort to fix what you did. Otherwise, I'm done." My parents' faces fell. They tried to argue, but I stood firm. I told them how their decision impacted me, how hard I had worked to make ends meet, how humiliating it felt to beg for scholarships after believing I had a fund. The more I spoke, the more my voice wavered with anger and hurt. My mom finally admitted, "We just wanted to help Derek. We never expected it would turn out like this." It wasn't enough. They still didn't grasp that my future wasn't something to gamble away on a whim. Eventually, I stood up, thanked them for meeting me, and walked out. My heart pounded as I left them in that cafe, looking shocked and confused. I felt a strange mix of sadness and empowerment. I had spoken my truth and set a clear boundary. No reconciliation without real restitution or accountability. Later, I returned to my dorm and cried into my pillow, drained from the emotional toll. Kayla, hearing my sobs, came over and patted my back. I didn't have to explain anything. She already knew the gist of it. In that moment, I realized that cutting them off might be the only way to truly protect myself. Over time, the pain lessened. I poured my energy into my studies, friendships, and part-time job. Each day I spent away from my parents' toxic influence, I grew stronger and more sure of myself. I began to see that family is more than just blood. It's the people who support you, respect you, and value your dreams. By the end of my first year at State University, I had decent grades, managed to pay off most of my debts, and maintained a supportive circle of friends. Although I occasionally felt a pang of loneliness, especially during holidays, I reminded myself that peace was better than forced unity. My parents still reached out sometimes, but I stayed firm. Until they truly understood the gravity of their betrayal and made an effort to repair it, I would keep my distance. As for Derek, he never apologized. He drove around in that car like nothing had happened, and I learned to let go of the resentment, knowing it would only poison my spirit. Standing at the threshold of my sophomore year, I felt a sense of hope. My parents had taken my college fund to buy my brother a car, but they couldn't steal my determination. I had cut them off completely and found my own path forward.